say anything bad then. Okay, well, welcome to the Burn CORSIA webinar. I can see we're at about 30 attendees so far. I do apologize if you kind of got the tail end of some of our initial introductory conversations as panelists. I'm delighted that you've taken the time to both register and join us today, either this morning if you're here in Europe, or this afternoon if you're over in Asia. We've assembled a really great panel of experts to specifically talk around CORSIA. We like to think CORSIA is real. It's here. There's some really great evidence to show that not only are people engaging with it, but the market is already active. A number of us, I'm sure, are very intimate with some of the auctions that CBL Expansive have run in the late last year and during Q1 around the JRED products for Guyana. If you look at obviously the ICE exchange as well, and in particular December 25 traded contract, there are already 208 traded contracts on that particular exchange, and the current price is sort of creeping up. It's around about $16.25 at the moment. So we're seeing real, albeit slow, real activity within the CORSIA market, but it's not without its difficulties, and really that's what we are here to explore today. We've brought together, and I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves in a moment, but we've brought together representatives from what I'd like to think is the entire supply chain of CORSIA, ranging from ourselves as suppliers, as represented by Molly. There's the consumers of the credits. We have AirAsia joined us, as well as intermediary specialists and insurance providers. CORSIA will represent a really interesting point for the voluntary carbon market, and we think the market is really at an interesting nexus this year. There are a number of activities going on, whether they are Article 6 related around Singapore compliance schemes, for example, or high integrity related around CCP label credits. But CORSIA most certainly is one of those key drivers of both change and growth. Before I hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves, I just want to encourage you as an attendee to ask some questions, to pose the questions through the Q&A. I have a list of already organized questions here, and we can certainly fill the hour with those, but we want to make this as interactive as possible. This is an opportunity for yourselves to ask ourselves what sort of key questions you have and what sort of key issues that you want us to explore. So I have from one of my other screens the Q&A panel live, and as I see them come up, I'll seek to weave them into our conversations. So let me press on to some introductions. So without further ado, I'm going to go in the order in which it's on my screen. So Molly, can I ask you to give yourself a quick introduction?
Hi, everybody. My name's Molly. I'm the head of carbon strategy at Burn Manufacturing. We are one of the world's largest clean cooking carbon projects. And I've been doing a lot of work working with many different African governments, as well as buyers and intermediaries on how we can get ready as a supplier to CORSIA and ensure we have all the right processes and documents and everything in place so that we can get started.
Thank you, Molly. Munching, over to yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Munching. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of the AirAsia Aviation Group. We operate 7 airlines in 5 countries in Southeast Asia, all of which are CORSIA participating states. So they are Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Cambodia. So I'm responsible for the sustainability strategy of all these airlines, and this includes our SAF and CORSIA approaches. Other than that, I also chair Malaysia's National Task Force on CORSIA, and I'm a member of the ICAO Committee for Aviation Environmental Protection Working Group on CORSIA. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. And we're delighted you can join us today. Chris, over to you.
Douglas, thanks, and thanks, Burn, for hosting this. Chris Slater, founder, CEO here at OCA, carbon insurance company. We, if you don't know, Aqua, we're a dedicated carbon insurer, really built over the course of the last 3 years to try and solve some of the risk problems that exist in the carbon market. With related to CORSIA, we've probably spent over 12 months now dedicating time to building a specific product that deals with one of the issues that no doubt we'll get into today around corresponding adjustment risk. And to that extent, I think over that time, we've probably reviewed about 70 LOAs. So we're well versed in, some of the aspects of how the market is looking to try and build supply, and working with the likes of Molly, Byrne and team to try and bring credits to the CORSIA market. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Chris. Again, delighted to have you with us today. And finally, but certainly not the least, Juan Carlos, over to you.
Thank you, Douglas. Hi, everyone. My name is Juan Carlos. I am the Director of Knowledge Policy and Advocacy at Abatable in London. But in addition to that, since 2019, I have been a member of the technical advisory body for CORSIA. So as part of our role is to assess those who apply for CORSIA eligibility and for those who comply with emissions unit criteria set by ICAO, for us as staff to recommend eligibility conditions for ICAO to decide on eligibility. A pleasure to be here.
Great, thank you very much. And I'm going to start with you, Carlos, if I may, with my first question.
Sure.
Airlines have got until January 2028, beg your pardon, to meet phase one compliance.
Yes.
I think it's well broadcast what the level of demand is within that, in a kind of range of between about 80 to 120 million, I think, and maybe you can add to that. But I guess what I'm more interested in and what really wanted to explore is what do you see as the constraints on supply to address that particular demand?
Sure. So we know that today there are 6 eligible standards or carbon crediting programs that can provide CORSIA eligible units to the market. That means that any project that is registered with them and that has their first crediting period starting in 2016 or later, and who has units representing mitigation from 2021 or later, so vintages 2021 or later, those are the ones that can become CORSIA eligible and then be supplied to airlines. The challenge that we see in the market these days is that for those projects and those units to have full CORSIA eligibility and to have the CORSIA label in the crediting standards is they need letters of authorization from the host countries. And depending on which registry you are working with, if you are with Gold Standard or VCS or ART-TRIS, Global Carbon Council, etc., you may need either a contribution to a buffer pool, or you may need some kind of approved insurance policy that represents the covering the risk of LOA revocation, or that no corresponding adjustment is made. So that's the key constraint that we see in the market today. Government's responses.
Just as a quick follow-up, I think if I recall correctly, Abatable produced a CORSIA assessment
That's
a few weeks back. And what's your assessment on the supply then? When do you foresee supply coming into the market, and by how much?
Sure. So what we see today is that there are about 40 projects that fulfill all of the conditions that the standards have for CORSIA eligibility. And collectively, they are ready to supply 16 million tons of CORSIA eligible units. However, the demand is, as you said, is over 100 million tons for the first phase. So basically, in 2 years, in the next couple of years, the 16 million tons need to grow to more than 100 million tons. From our own analysis, what we see is that there are an additional couple of thousand projects that could become CORSIA eligible in the sense of getting their LOAs and then finally be able to provide those units to the market. If that's the case, our analysis shows that the supply could reach something in between 100 and 115 million tons for the first phase.
Excellent, thank you. Well, Chin, if I may, I'm going to move to yourself now, and as I indicated a moment ago, as an airline, you still have plenty of time. You have until January 2028 in order to both acquire and then retire the relevant credits. And of course, this isn't a process that started just this month. This has been going for a number of years already. I'm interested in how you, AirAsia, are preparing yourself for CORSIA, and also how some of your colleagues that you're aware of are also preparing yourself. And what would you anticipate will be the procurement approaches that you'll take to start to comply with Phase 1 CORSIA?
We have actually started preparing for this a few years back, a couple of years, especially to start by modeling what will be our requirements. So obviously we looked at our previous emissions growth patterns and also track what is our recovery. There's still a lot of gap because in Southeast Asia, we are still quite far from 2019. In fact, I just look at the recent statistics, we're still just about 70% of 2019, 75% of 2019. But nonetheless, I think the way CORSIA is designed is that it's a collective scheme. So we have already begun modeling what could be our Phase 1 compliance requirement and what could be the Phase 2 compliance once China and India and Vietnam, which are the three major countries that concerns us, enter the scheme, and what would happen once that happens. So when I look around in the region, I would say that actually we are quite a lot behind some of the more developed, more advanced approaches in some of the countries. So I would say that there are very few airlines in this region that actually know how to model this and can forecast what could be their emissions. So that's one big challenge. And I would say also that at the policy making level, my engagements with policymakers is that they themselves do not forecast what could be their national requirement, or at least the requirement of their airlines. So that's some of the gaps that we are trying to fill. So I mentioned earlier, I'm also the national chair for Malaysia. So that's what I also do. I also look at the national level statistics and forecast what could be the Phase 1 compliance that Malaysian carriers will need, and also look at what the region might need. So this is one part that we're doing. The second part is actually trying to identify what kind of projects there are in this region. I think we all know only one firm project, which is the Guyana project. I think Juan Carlos mentioned just now there are 40 projects worldwide, but actually we don't even know what these are because they are not labeled. And that is a challenge because none of us, we are all aviation people. I think all of you are carbon people, we are aviation people. We don't really know how to tell the differences between all those, the specific criteria. So we're waiting for the labeling to come out, and that has been quite that's not currently available, and is also subject to getting LOA. So the two levels is quite challenging for us to identify which are the ones that are currently eligible. So that is an ongoing process. We are taking more of a national level approach where we try to talk to the Ministry of Environment to see what are available nationally, because that's kind of more manageable within our area, and try to see which are the ones that we can work with to get them up to CORSIA, full CORSIA eligibility. The other one is also to look at some of the constraints, the wider constraints. I think Juan Carlos mentioned earlier that there are only 6 emissions unit programs. We know that Thailand has, for example, submitted their program for eligibility, but it hasn't succeeded. So we're also talking to the TGO, which is organization, to see, are they going to continue? And we would highly urge them and encourage them to also go ahead and reapply again, resubmit for Phase 2, because it will be important for us to be able to have more emissions unit programs and also more methodologies that will be relevant for the region. So in terms of, the strategies, it's going to differ for each airline and each country. Obviously, we know that IATA has already held 2 rounds of joint purchase. So IATA is holding one every quarter. There have been 2 rounds, one last year and one in March. And both are purchase of the Guyana credits. So that's basically, we understand that the first round, 11 airlines have made purchases, and the second round, we don't know how much. So a lot of it is not very available, but we know what are the prices are. But I think the last one was 22.35, if I'm not, 22.25. So recently, we also spoke with some other projects. We think the price will range between $15 upwards, but that's again to be seen when the supply comes around. So what most airlines will be doing will be to kind of monitor how all these things are developing to decide on when they will purchase.
Interesting. And to pick up on a point, I think we were saying just at the very beginning, as a quick side chat, you were indicating that there's still probably not a strong awareness of CORSIA
No.
and the requirements across the airline industry as they should be. And it'd be good if you could just kind of expand on that, and also, what role we in the carbon industry should be undertaking to help build that awareness.
Right, I got to know I heard of Article 6 for the first time just at the end of 2023. I had no idea, what all these things meant. We came from an aviation sector, we were just emerging from, almost total devastation during COVID, and then to be told that we have to also do all this decarbonization, and nobody really understood what was happening in the carbon markets as well. So when we realized that, okay, yes, the country has signed on to CORSIA and we will have to offset, but nobody has kind of explained to us what does that mean, how much, how do we forecast all these things. So those are things we had to learn ourselves. And then we found out that even the policymakers, they sort of assume that, okay, we join what ICAO recommends, and these solutions will be automatically available. So nobody understood there are also differences in standards, certification, all these intricacies. And when we came into the picture and we looked at what is available, we realized there are actually no solutions in our region. And so when we came back to the policymakers, there are no projects in Malaysia, what do you want us to do? And then everybody sort of panicked. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we set up a national task force, which the industry is leading, which I'm leading. And this is the same thing that we see replicated across all the other countries as well. Some know a little bit more. I remember I went to the Philippines, I met with the Minister of Environment. She had no idea Philippines even signed up to CORSIA. I met with the Thai government. They had no idea that's how much Thailand would need for CORSIA. So it's not long time ago that this happened. This is as recent as last year. So that is a huge challenge for us, because we come in as airlines expecting, okay, you put a regulation in place, we will follow and we will purchase. But what happens when none of these solutions are available, and most airlines and policymakers are not even ready for all these things like attestation, so on and so forth.
Super interesting. Really, really good. Chris, if I can turn to you now, I'm sure you're having many conversations right across the industry, both buyers of these credits, whether they are airlines or intermediaries, and suppliers like ourselves. Be really interesting if you could share what are your observations? What are you hearing from those parties, and how ready do you think everybody is for CORSIA Phase 1?
Yeah, it's interesting hearing Munching talk about the awareness levels needing to rise, I guess, across the airline industry, and I think that's pretty consistent, I think, with what we've heard as we've engaged with potential buyers, ultimately airlines of CORSIA eligible credits. But mainly we focused our time working with developers and suppliers of credits, enabling them to meet to what Munching's describing is like there's obviously a vacuum in terms of available credits at the moment. I think my perspective on the market is that what ICAO has done is laid out the framework, and now that's well established. It's our role within the market is now we're in capacity building, aren't we? We're in education and capacity building. And really, for me, that's sort of on a number of levels. There's work that we can do as an insurer, because look, the airlines buy insurance solutions, manage risk across their infrastructure, working with insurance brokers, and we've been trying to help through that direction educate insurance brokers so they can sit across the table and make them aware of some of these compliance requirements, make them aware of some of the schemes. But that's very sort of insurance specific. On the carbon market, the barriers to supply are really what Juan Carlos talked about. One is, LOAs, eligible LOAs, signed LOAs that are potentially insurable and acceptable by the standards bodies. That's one. I think there's a second issue which developers are grappling with, which is methodologies, and in the clean cooking space, looking to migrate, for example, within VCS to eligible pathways. So that's sort of a second hurdle, I think, in terms of supply in the near term. But as we talk to many of those developers, they're putting in place, and many of them were on that migration path anyway. I think some of that maybe has just been accelerated. And then the third bottleneck really is eligibility of private insurance as part of the scheme. And having spent 12 months working predominantly with VCS and Gold Standard to try and solve this issue around double counting, we feel very ready now. Policy's been built, products actually been bought. We've, even over recent months, we can see demand starting to be built, and almost the trail of contracting starting to be put together. So whether that's an intermediary who's been educating an airline, looking to buy and put in place potential supply over the next 5 years, working with the supplier like a Bern to go, okay, can we put those sort of forward delivery contracts of CORSIA eligible credits? So almost the infrastructure for buying has almost been laid out, and the sort of final piece of the jigsaw, we quite often, when are you going to get approved? When are you going to get
I
approved?
was about to ask that exact question. I mean,
Yeah.
can you give any kind of status on where the registry bodies are?
So slightly frustrating. I'm sure if there's some of the standards bodies on the call, hopefully not too dismissive of the work they've been doing. But we've spent most of last year helping them preparing a policy that will work for this market. So we're slightly surprised with the announcements in November post COP around MEGA being the only insurance provider to be approved. Just a reminder on MEGA, they're usually an insurer of last resort. They're an insurer that typically steps in where insurance isn't available. And I and my peers in the insurance industry have policies that are ready. So that's one potential, one issue. And second is that the types of projects and the size of the projects that MEGA and the time it will take to get an insurance policy with MEGA, for many developers, it's just inaccessible route. So, I think Gold Standard have been running a very public process, and engagement with them with the private insurance market has been very positive. And I'd expect probably we sort of, I've been told June time, but I sort of carbon markets 3 years. I sort of put 2 or 3 months on everything, and then more. So I'm sort of thinking it's early summer that will be approved by Gold Standard. And then Vera, actually imminently, we're looking to take a project to Vera that has an eligible LOA, that has an insurance product wrapped around it, and really to try and force the agenda item of, okay, can this project now get a CORSIA label? And I hope to find out over probably the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks whether that's there. But everything feels imminent. It's like the market's ready to go.
Yeah.
Just needs a couple of these pieces to drop. And I think governments will then start to awaken to the fact, well, okay, trades are starting to happen, availability of climate finance into the country, LOAs, and the importance of getting LOAs signed and in a particular structure, I think then will be the catalyst. But so imminent, I guess, Douglas, but I've said that for the last 6 months.
Good. I mean, I think I'm picking up similar sentiment to yourself. I think it feels like definitely the second half of this year is going to be super interesting with all these pieces coming into place. I'm going to come to yourself, Molly, and talk about pieces coming into place. Before I do, I just wanted to kind of remind everybody, please do post your questions. I've seen a couple come in. There's a really juicy one coming up, actually, which I think I'm going to put to you, Juan Carlos, in a minute. It's almost the elephant in the room question, I think. But Molly, I'm going to just kind of continue on the thread of conversation that we're talking about. And I think one of the kind of key threads and one of the key pieces that is necessary, obviously, is supply. And it would be great if you could share your perspective on how not just Bern, but other project developers as well. How are they getting ready for CORSIA, and what are the key challenges that we and our peer groups are facing to get the ultimate certification that we needed for these credits?
Thanks, Douglas. I think one of the interesting questions that the market has been facing in general is this balance between let's go, particularly with the CORSIA phase 1 deadline of January 2028, but also matching that with let's get it right. And I think a lot of the work that the sector has been doing, both on the supply side and on the kind of infrastructural side, is this piece about trying to get it right. It's very important that we don't have some kind of issue where there's poor quality supply, or where host country governments kind of feel pressured into breaking their NDCs, because what we really want to make sure is that this market is kind of set up for success at the start and in the long term. So what we've kind of had for the last, I guess, year or so, as Chris from the insurance side has also experienced, is the problem where we've been building the plane while we're flying it. And definitely one of the issues that we're having, I think, is that host country governments are still getting their regulations right. It's really important that we have the institutional frameworks so that LOAs that are issued appropriately following due process, and so that the projects that are approved are meeting not only CORSIA's eligibility criteria, but also the eligibility criteria set out by host countries. So some national governments want to prioritize, for example, technology projects over forestry projects, or maybe they really want to get forestry projects as part of their eligible NDC. So this piece around creating whitelists and generating, the infrastructure has been slow, but I think necessary. And to Chris's point, I think the next half of this year will be very interesting for that. We have quite a few, from a kind of African continental perspective, quite a few governments that are basically ready to go. And I think what we will see for CORSIA Phase 1 in particular is that the supply will most likely come from projects that are already started, because we're going to need to have credits available for retiring in January 2028. That means ideally they're in the 2026 December BTR, unless they have insurance, in which case that can obviously work. But probably in order to get credits ready for that deadline, we're going to need projects that already exist from established players who are already using the best quality methodologies. And if there are new projects coming through, they will need to be from project types that have very quick turnarounds. So Cookstoves, for example, is one of them. Obviously, if you're doing a forestry project and you're starting from scratch, that it's going to take a long time before those credits come through. So I think we've been seeing a lot of challenges across the whole space, both from the airline side, as Munching said, from the insurance side, from the kind of getting the infrastructure right. But I do feel like there are lots of very good, high quality projects out there that are kind of on the cusp of getting these pieces to fall into place. It's a lot of work from host country governments to build the regulations, set the NDCs, do the greenhouse gas inventory, get the LOAs in place, and then do all the appropriate reporting to make sure you have an insurable LOA that's been filed with the UN. But once that process starts to flow, I'm feeling quite confident that we'll start seeing supply available so that airlines can begin to purchase.
And do you have a sense, and forgive me, I'm putting you slightly on the spot here, a bit like kind of Chris's question, but do you have a sense where we'll start to see the first LOAs emerge, either within Africa or in other parts of the world? What are you hearing?
It's a bet, isn't it? As to which countries we think are going to go first. Obviously, Guyana's, way ahead out there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's 5 or 6 African countries that will be ready before Christmas, and then it will just depend which projects are already, on good terms with those governments and have available credits that are ready to go.
Good, thank you. Juan Carlos, I'm going to come to yourself now, and I'm going to take one of the audience questions here and pose it to you. And I'm paraphrasing the question a little bit, but the essence of the question is talking around there's a lot of geopolitical risk going on in the world at the moment. And the world most definitely is distracted on other issues outside of climate. And with, of course, the sentiment of the Trump government, their withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, Europe potentially getting kind of cold feet on CORSIA. How do you see the risk of CORSIA progressing, whether it's phase 1 or even into phase 2? How are all these geopolitical forces potentially affecting the scheme?
Sure. Well, I am biased, I guess, on the optimistic side of things. We know that the US just withdraws from the Paris Agreement, meaning it doesn't have an NDC, and hence it may not issue any letter of authorization because there is nothing to do a corresponding adjustment against. No, there is no reference point. But they are not moving out of ICAO, and they have not expressed so far that they are moving out of CORSIA as a scheme. So that means that the US-based airlines in principle, continue to participate, no, unless the Federal Civil Aviation Agency from the US decides otherwise, or the Trump administration decides otherwise, they continue to participate. The supply from the US may not materialize in the absence of LOAs. So that's the risk in relation to how the decisions in the US may impact the market. On the other hand, Europe has been quite vocal for a couple of years already that they have their own ambition in terms of how much they can contribute to fighting climate change, so on a mitigation side of things. They want to make sure that the aviation sector, that is also a source of emissions, they do their own bit in that process of decarbonizing Europe and so on. And they have expressed again and again that in 2026, they will run their own assessment in terms of whether CORSIA is stringent enough and if it's delivering the type of results that Europe is expecting from it. It doesn't mean that they are getting cold feet. It's something that has been mentioned. So from my perspective, there is certainty that Europe will do that type of assessment. So unless the scheme shows that no one is compensating emissions, no supply is coming on, everyone has left, or if that's the case, so what we are saying is, well, emissions from the aviation sector continue to grow. No, and there is no way that we can stop that, or there is no way that we can compensate for that. If that is what is happening with the scheme, then for sure it's very likely that the European Union will say, well, that's the risk, and hence we are not willing to go with it. No, but in my perspective, that's unlikely. No. And then other countries, the fact that the US has a certain view on climate doesn't mean that it's shared by other countries. And I think we have seen that again and again over the last months, no, since the beginning of the Trump administration. The US, as a sovereign, can decide what to do, no, in terms of climate, of course, but it doesn't mean that is imposed on anyone else. So overall, yes, there are some risks associated to a new scheme that involves everyone. But in my perspective, it's manageable risk. No, but I mean, we just have to understand what is underneath that.
And just to kind of add a little bit extra here, what are you hearing in terms of potential development of penalty regimes? I mean, the UK has been very quick to put something in place. But what else are you hearing about other governments?
Similar, yes. So what needs to happen is for the aviation authorities or their counterparts in the environment or sustainable development side of the government, they have to define what are the fees or penalties that apply to the aviation sector, not to the participating airlines, in the case that they don't monitor and report their emissions, they don't produce the verified report in terms of our annual emissions, they don't compensate for their emissions, and they don't prepare and submit their compensation report as well. No, so the fees are in relation to that, and every country will have to enact its own administrative rules stating that. No, that's part of how CORSIA is conceived. Now, we all have heard about the UK having a certain number, no, £100 per ton of CO2 if aviation doesn't comply with, but also other countries have already expressed and put in administrative rules how and how much they want to charge in the case of non-compliance with these other bits that are part of the whole CORSIA scheme. For instance, Brazil has already expressed in reais how much that may be. So what we should expect is for these type of fees or penalties to come into administrative rules applicable to the aviation sector in each country over the next couple of years. Just be mindful that we are still in the voluntary phase. So even though yes, we're expecting to see demand and everything, we're still in a voluntary phase. So not every country is willing to enact regulation until we reach the compliance phase. And it's up to each country to accelerate the fees or the penalties and to apply those in the voluntary phase, or to wait until this becomes a compliance and obligation for everyone who joins later in 2027.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks, Juan Carlos. I'm getting some other questions coming in. That's great. And just encourage if there's any burning questions from the attendees. We are going to keep this to an hour. So I'm looking at the clock here. We've got another 23 minutes left to go. So if you've got that burning question, please bring it in. I'm just going to kind of come over to yourself now and maybe build on some of the points you were making earlier around yourselves and your peers of making some time at building the insurance products. Wondering if you could kind of share to the audience, what is it the insurance products are going to do? What risk are you seeking to protect there? And therefore, how particular airlines, when they think about these purchases, what should they expect and want to see put in place to mitigate any risk?
Yeah, thanks, Douglas. I mean, I guess to stress the point that what the TAB has done is, to my earlier point, put in place, design the architecture so that airlines don't need to worry about some of the intricacies that we're now going to get into from a risk perspective, corresponding adjustment, LOAs, and really how the system has been designed is that a risk exists around double counting. If a host country doesn't make the corresponding adjustment within their BTR, within their next BTR report, which is typically going to be every 2 years, this risk exists that the corresponding adjustment's not made, and effectively those credits that have been sold to the airlines could also be used by the country within their NDCs. So that's the risk that's been highlighted. I mean, it's interesting for me coming newish into the market. That risk has always existed, and now within CORSIA, what we have designed is a system that now the standards body's responsibility is to make sure that if that CA is not made, a developer will be required to replace with another eligible CORSIA eligible unit. And actually in recent guidelines from the standards bodies, the credit that had been sold and bought and maybe even retired by the airline won't lose the CORSIA label, which again is, I think, a strong measure and strong confidence into the airline space, which is aviation can buy those credits, can use them as part of their compliance requirements. Now, if there's an issue, the system will make good. So standards body will come to developer will need to replace the credit with another CORSIA eligible credit. And that's really where our policy has been designed. Our policy has been designed to pay out so that the developer can remediate, can basically, instead of holding cash separately themselves or holding a buffer pool of their own credits, we will pay them so they can then go and seek CORSIA eligible credits. Now, again, elephant in the room, the question we always get asked, which is, well, at the moment, there's such a limited supply. How can you guarantee that there will be CORSIA eligible credits? And what I say into the market is that's an early market issue. That's an issue for today. Won't be an issue, as Juan Carlos has explained, if supply is built and there's 100 million credits that are available in supply in a couple of years' time. So it's an issue that the market, it's unsolvable. The solution to that problem is we need to build the market. We need to educate. We need to put in place now these final pieces that starts to grow supply, and then we'll have a liquid market that will allow us to be able to trade and source eligible credits, and developers to be able to source credits if that CA is not made. So our product's very simple. It pays out if that CA is not made, gives the developer cash to be able to replace those credits. System's made good. Airline probably won't even know about it, and probably even shouldn't know about it. They've bought their credits as a part of a compliance regime. They've retired them. Systems made good. So my call to action into airlines is that we've had lots of conversations around, well, can we buy insurance? Can we buy coverage? Intermediaries saying, can we buy coverage? What happens if a developer doesn't replace those credits? My message is don't worry about that. The system has been designed that the standards body and the insurance body will make good, and therefore there's no risk for the airline or indeed for the intermediary, because it's been solved by insurance market and the standards bodies. Really
good. That's a really strong message. Thanks, Chris. Mengqing, I'm gonna move to yourself now and in part build on again one of the points Chris has made, and also bring in a question from the audience here. As an airline or as a sort of representing kind of the voice of the airlines, I mean, what challenges do you face in getting these credits? Supply notwithstanding, I think we've definitely explored that, but in terms of actually buying them and purchasing them, what do you face, and how can the market make it easier for you? Oh, Mengqing, sorry, you need to take yourself off mute.
Okay. Sorry. I think a big part of it will be taken care of if the insurance part is sorted. As Chris said, I don't really want to know about things flipping. If I've purchased it at a time when it is certified, I should get a certified product. That's it. I shouldn't have to worry that, oh, some verification process didn't go well and therefore it gets reversed. So I think that is what IQ is trying to build into the system, and that's what the reversal buffer is about. And that would take care of a lot of it. Ideally, as an airline, I think there was a question, I shouldn't have to worry about all these things. I should just have a range of available products with their prices and where they are, and I just choose based on the factors that I want in order to balance some of our priorities. So that is basically the design of the system. But I mean, we do have other challenges which could also be specific to our region. So one of the problems of there being low awareness is that I'm not sure if you're aware, but actually in Southeast Asia, we can't actually pass environmental costs on to passengers without government approvals. So as of now, I can't introduce an environmental fee on airfares. This is not permitted. So I've spent a good part of 2 years asking governments for the authorization to introduce these charges. And so far, we've been successful in Malaysia, but it's still pending in many of the other countries. So this is again an issue about how do we finance this? And that is the information gap. Somehow it came to be that the aviation regulators have signed on to this scheme, not knowing how this is going to be paid for, or not caring how this is going to be paid for. And it is not possible for the industry to pay for it at a time when it is still recovering from a very damaging period during COVID. So this is one of the other challenges that we have to deal with. And to navigate through all these things amidst all the unknowns. So I have brokers coming to me every week offering something. But the bulk of them, you can ask them, you know that they don't really know what they're selling. They're just selling you a carbon product. They themselves don't even know there is a difference between a CORSIA eligibility criteria and a non-CORSIA eligibility criteria. I get banks coming, brokers coming, and it's all vague. So, I mean, one of the response that I could have is just to ignore all of them. It's no point engaging if, we can't even figure out where the money is coming from. So it process now, what we are trying to do is to see how, one of the reasons why I think we mentioned earlier, Dr. Waini is which is basically the carbon market person in Malaysia. So we try to split up our tasks. So if the system in terms of, making sure all these are taken care of, then we can focus on the other parts. So what we are trying to do now is trying to get governments to allow us to introduce carbon fees, and then we can have the money to be able to begin our purchasing decisions. Now, the challenge of CORSIA is there is a lag to this scheme. Nobody actually knows what they owe until more than a year later. So I don't know what I owe for 2024 until the end of this year, by which time all the passengers have already gone. They would not have paid for it. So you end up having to load all the costs onto future passengers. And that's what we're trying to avoid. And that's why we're trying to tell governments we have to begin charging now. And then it comes to the question of how the practice has been. So if you go to many airlines right now, they're actually offering you, oh, buy this credit right now. But actually, we're not buying for today. We need to collect the money now to buy for future. And how to communicate that? I collect the money today, and then they will say, you didn't buy anything with it. What did I buy with that money? But if the product is not ready, how do I communicate that message? So having to explain that part is another big part of the challenge. So I think if there's anything that could be done, is that the carbon markets, the communication coming from there to the governments need to be clearer on this, that CORSIA itself has this inbuilt lags. The market is only it's an early market issue. We won't know the supply until 2 years later. No one is going to buy everything upfront now. They're going to wait and see what is coming on. And so it's part of our strategy on how to manage all these different moving parts as well. Yeah.
Really interesting. Really interesting. I'm conscious of time, but Molly, I've just got one kind of last question for yourself, and then we'll get into sort of wrapping up. And again, I'm going to steal a little bit of something I've come up from the audience here with something we'd already prepared, which is I said at the top of the call that 2025 is an interesting year for the market as a whole and developers in particular. You know, there's multiple things going on, so not just CORSIA. Certainly, there's CCP labeling, and definitely within cook stoves now with the ICVCM opining on it in March. Of course, there's a number of Article 6, about 6.2 compliance schemes, and 6.4 now. Can you share a couple of perspectives from the developer on how developers make decisions across all this? And also, I'm going to throw in a little bit here from the audience and of how do you think developers should be thinking about not treating all of this as just commodities, you know, a compliance credit, that it actually this project should stand out different from any other particular project?
Thanks, Douglas. I think it's interesting because when we talk about quality, it sort of implies that credits that already exist are not high quality, which I don't think is true. I think there's a lot of very high quality projects that already exist, that are already supplying the voluntary carbon markets and are looking, as I said, to switch over. And particularly for CORSIA, because we have this tight timeline, it will probably be conversion projects from VCM that are the main bulk of supply in the first couple of years. And the question there is then, which of the different methodologies, which of the different certification levels is a project developer trying to aim for? And at the moment, we're seeing starting of convergence, but it's not fully converged. Kind of what's the best practice? What's the kind of highest integrity thing that project developers can do, particularly with some of the emission factors that are still up for debate in the cookstove world. So, for example, FNRB, which if you're a carbon person means a lot, and if you're an airline may or may not. But yeah, I think it's interesting time for developers, particularly as we look towards new interventions and innovations in the space. So, for example, digital monitoring, that costs money, that does bring quality. Is it necessary? No, but we might get to a place where we're seeing that airlines want to buy kind of the lowest common denominator, and they just want to kind of comply. Or we start seeing a world where actually everybody, including the airlines, are willing to pay a bit more for quality. And that's kind of the unanswered question, I suppose, in the market to date, is what that split will look like. As Burn, as the developer, we're aiming for the highest integrity. We think that's really important. But exactly what that looks like and exactly how the market's going to react to that is I think still remains to be seen. And as part of that includes host country governments, who obviously have their own NDCs to protect, and we do think that there will likely be some kind of process where governments aren't just letting any old credit through from any old CDM methodology. We want them to be, looking at best practice and at what's their personal, national, I suppose, exports and how can they protect those.
Very good, thank you. I'm conscious we're coming up on time now, so and with no further questions that have come in, so I'm going to ask each of you now to help us wrap up. So just a couple of quick kind of final reflections, and if you're feeling bold, it'd be great to hear some predictions for this year, kind of bleeding into next. So Juan Carlos, let's start with yourself. Oh, Juan Carlos, you're still on mute, my friend.
Sorry. Yes. No. Good. So what do we expect for towards the end of this year? More LOAs to come through. Many countries are getting themselves ready in terms of their own carbon markets regulations, including how they engage with Article 6, and in that context, how and when do they issue letters of authorization. So we are monitoring close to 50 countries who are in that process. So we may expect more LOAs to come through, and ideally those will unlock additional supply by the end of this year.
Super, very good. Chris?
Yeah, I'm an optimist like Juan Carlos as well. So I think similarly, I think we'll see LOAs come through. I think we'll see transactions start to take place. And I think just a what I'm encouraged about what we're building here is, I think, a blueprint for other markets as well around accessibility of carbon credits into compliance schemes where issues are being resolved by the voluntary market, that really raises the bar for what credits are available and accessible. So I see, my prediction on CORSIA is I think it can be the blueprint that we can then actually start to see port into other quasi-compliance or other compliance schemes. So yeah, hopeful to see that come through.
Thank you. Mengqing. Sorry, Mengqing. Yeah, we've got you on mute still.
I think the recent purchases by some airlines through the IATA scheme is setting a good signal. In fact, from an airline perspective, we don't actually want this whole thing to be cancelled. We put too much effort into it already. We are worried about what the US might do because even though, yes, I think I agree with Juan Carlos, they don't determine everybody else, but they also provide a lot of support for the architecture around CORSIA and the working groups that we work in. So if all that disappears, then there will be a big technical gap that needs to be filled. So we don't really want it to collapse. So we think that it will get more airlines looking at this seriously, and it could create more of a demand signal for the market. So in the region, I think there are some governments that have already indicated they're willing to issue LOAs. Indonesia is one of them. The gap is that they have credits that do not meet CORSIA criteria. So I think hopefully some of these new, confirmed purchases will get them to also align some of their standards to the gold standard ones that are CORSIA eligible. So we do think that there might be some activity in this region.
Very good. Thank you. Molly?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everybody. I think we're almost ready to go. I think the question then comes to kind of the buyers and the intermediaries is like, when's the time to press the big green button? And I think the answer is almost certainly pretty soon, because even if things start to kind of pick up between now and the end of the year, I think we're still probably looking, as Abatable have forecast, at constrained supply in the first couple of years. So I think it would be beneficial for everybody to get some of those transactions rolling, and we can see, I guess, where that takes us.
Brilliant. Thank you. I mean, thank you all. Just to quickly kind of wrap up, it's been a great session, and I think it kind of proves how interesting a discussion point this is, that the hour has absolutely flown by, and I'm sure there are many more questions that we could have explored within it. But to all, I mean, the kind of notes that I've made here and some of the key points is, there's still an level of awareness that needs to be built, particularly amongst the airlines, to ensure that the scheme is understood and their role within the scheme and what their actual obligations are. That we are definitely at the beginning of a process here, but the process has started. That we should take comfort in the fact that the CORSIA is here and it's real. But we're in a place of capacity building and putting in place all the relevant kind of key pieces that we need to make this happen. And I think it won't be that long until we look back and realize actually we're now in the midst of something really interesting here. And as to echo what Chris was saying, there's a really interesting blueprint for potentially other markets. If there's a common theme, I guess, that's sort of picked out is a sense of a constraint of supply. I can talk from a Bern perspective, which is we are working very hard. In fact, Molly and her team and our government team are working very hard across the 12 different governments to get in place the relevant LOAs to be able to deliver supply. And I'm sure that's echoed right across the industry. But we also recognize and we're respectful of the fact that the governments want to take their time. They want to put in place the right legislation and the right framework. So therefore, those LOAs are solid. And as Chris was saying, all of this insurance and understanding just sort of happens as a background activity, that as a purchaser of the credits, you should not need to worry about it. You should be reassured that the protections are in place and that the product you've bought is solid and will be there for you. So I just want to wrap up by saying a quick thank you to everybody. Thank you to the audience for spending an hour with us today exploring this, but more particularly thank you to each of the panelists. I know these things take a little time to prepare, and thank you for that. It does feel like sometimes like herding cats, trying to bring experts like yourselves together for a critical hour of a particular moment in time. But thank you for taking the time, and I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.